everybody, this is Amy Raymond. I was asked by Rio to do a couple projects. So my first project that I'd like to show you guys is I have a hat pin idea. So the backstory on it is I am a ranch wife and a mother of 2 boys, and when I'm being Amy Raymond the ranch wife, I really like to go ride in the mountains and gather cows, and there's a plant that really stands out to me every time I go and ride, and that's the Indian paintbrush. It also happens to be the Oregon state plant. Since I'm an Oregonian, that's kind of cool and fun to have it be a part of my work. I could figure out how to make it a bolo and a couple other things, but I really saw it as a hat pin. I've been searching online. I found a couple ones that I liked, and then I manipulated them to what I want it to be. So I'll show you guys the process. I'll show you what I'm gonna do, my thought process, why I'm doing it, the way I'm gonna go about attaching it to a hat, all of the steps, and stick with me. I think it's gonna be kind of fun. I'm really excited to see the finish. So what I'm gonna do is I shrunk this down to the size that I wanted it. I did it in 2 different sizes, and at first glance I really like this one. I thought when I copied this off that this was gonna be what I went for, but I don't think that that's gonna be it. I think we're gonna go with the little one. So then what I did was I took a piece, I use a lot of drafting paper to design my work with. So what we're gonna do is I have this nifty light box that I use. I wanted to manipulate the Indian paintbrush so it all came from one place. My thought in this whole deal is that you would kind of shove the bottom of the Indian paintbrush into the hat band, and then the Indian paintbrush would come out of the hat band. This is a statement piece. I want to make a statement with my Indian paintbrush on a hat. So I believe that I want it just a little bit taller, a little bit bigger. So I made a copy of it 120%. So 120% of this one that I made is about a ½ inch. You can see it's about a ½ inch bigger on each one. I really like this size. I think that's gonna look really fancy on a hat. So what I did is because I designed it a little bit smaller in the beginning, this is my piece of rose gold for the tops of the Indian paintbrush. I'm going to figure out as big of pieces as I can to utilize as much of the rose gold as I can, and to have these accent tops. So we're gonna figure that out. How I'm probably gonna do that is I'm gonna cut these out and see if I can fit them all on here, and I'll show you how I do that after I cut them out. Stick with me, it's gonna be fun. Okay, so we have our little piece of rose gold with this one top of the Indian paintbrush ready to cut out, and I thought while I was doing that, I might as well cut out as much as I can. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this out. And so this is a piece of 20 gauge sterling silver. Every time I use silver, I try to butt up in a corner because it just wastes less, and then maybe you can use the outside for, I don't know, a project of some kind. So now we got this glued down and my fingers are all sticky again. And then once this dries, then I'll cut this out with my jeweler saw and my bench, and then we can go figure out where the rest of these will fit and glue it all down over there. Okay, here's my sawing station. I thought we'd start with the plant itself, get the base cut out, and then we can go from there. I'm gonna use a 4/0 just because I have some really small areas to go into. If the area that I'm cutting into is like 45 degrees and less, I'll cut from one side and then pull my blade back out like I did right here. cut in one side, pull my blade back out, and then cut over, and then I'll cut down to the V. If it's like this one that I'm coming up to right now, I want that V to be very definite. So I'll pull my blade back out, and then I'll kind of come over and cut into it because it'll give this more definition. You want it to look crisp and clean, so you have to think about how your saw blade, you got to make your saw blade do the work, so in the end you don't have to run a tiny file or sandpaper in there to kind of clean stuff up. Ta-da! Look at that. So the next part of what I like to do, and it really depends on the piece I'm cutting out when I do this. You know, if you're cutting out a whole bunch of letters for a belt buckle, I'm going to do this first. But I'm going to decide which, because like if you look at that, there's a lot of definition that I'm missing that I could get if I saw more out. So I'm going to go through on the front and decide more parts, because this is pretty blah. I want more definition. I want more filigreed. I want to see the hat through it more. So what I'm going to do is decide the parts that need cut out. Like if I cut this out, it's going to make a big difference in this piece. And I think if I cut out where that purple is, if you can see it, then that would be a huge, that'd be a huge game changer. So how I do this is I drill a hole so I can stick my saw blade through it. So I'm going to go show you how I drill a hole. Okay, so flex shaft, drill with tiny hole. Just make sure your saw blade will go through it. It doesn't really matter the size. I mean, you don't want it so big that you're going to compromise your definition in your plants, but you want it big enough your saw blade will go through, but not too big, right, to screw y'all up. So 2 should get me. I should be able to get around in here and get around down here, and we'll see how much definition that helps with. But this is a pretty big piece and that one's kind of small, so I think it'll help with a lot of the definition of the plant. Brass hammer and my name stamp right here. So I'm going to come down here to the stems, stamp my name. It's all nice and neat, Raymond. There we go. It's good to go. Okay, we have my Indian Paintbrush base metal cut out, but we still have this wonderful paper on the top. The Ducko cement is water soluble, so all you have to do is soak it in water and this paper will pop right off. We'll leave it for 10 minutes and that paper will pull right off, and so will the glue. As promised, the paper came off the Indian Paintbrush really easy after I soaked it in water. So I soaked it in water for about 10 minutes and then it pops right off. So now we're gonna cut out the red tops on each one of these. So I cut the tops out of the Indian Paintbrush. So then these are the pieces that I'm going to glue on this beautiful piece of rose gold. This is the piece of rose gold that we glued part of the Indian Paintbrush down. So I glued this one down and I'm going to cut it out, and then I'm going to piece the other pieces together. Okay, now we're going to cut out the next piece. Notice I speed up my saw blade when I'm turning each corner. It doesn't matter what kind of corner it is. I'll stop my motion forward and I just let it move kind of in place. What it does is it cuts a bigger hole, so you can go any direction. And I'm sure I've said this before, but it's really important when you're running a jeweler's saw to be loose and easy and really think about the future of where your blade's gonna go and where you've been and how you want to get there. And you don't want to sit here with a file for 3 hours. Trust me, I've done it. So the more work you can do you can make your saw blade do for you, the less work you're going to do in the future. Okay, so the first piece we cut out looks like this when I pull it out of the water. We're going to just let that just pop right off like that. So that's my first top, and that goes there like that. The next step is I'm going to get each piece ready to solder. So what I want to do is I'm going to tin the back of each set of flowers. Right now there's no solder on the back of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put solder on the back of this. So I want to figure out which side's the top. This side's the top of this one. This side's the top of this one. So in order for solder to not go on something, you make it dirty. So you make the surface dirty. How you can do that, a very easy way, is you use a black Sharpie marker. And what I do is I color this side. So if your surface is dirty, there's less likely that your solder will stick to it. So the side that needs solder on it still looks like rose gold, and the side that I don't want solder on is black. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tin these pieces. So tinning means you're going to put the solder on the back of the rose gold. So so you can then heat up the base of the solder of the hat pin itself and solder, and then it'll solder to the piece. So what I'm going to do is I use handy flux. I'm going to flux the front where I don't want solder, and I flux the back. I'm going to set on my solder right board, and then I can be able to do them all at the same time. I'm going to just use my butane torch. I really, really don't want to melt this gold into a million pieces and have it not be okay. So then we will heat each piece up until the flux turns clear. Add solder to it. Soldering, I think, is definitely the hardest part of all this. But there we go. Then I'll stick them in water and let them cool down for a second, and then we'll solder them onto the piece itself, and I'll show you that too. Okay, so this beautiful container is full of boric acid and denatured alcohol. And what I will do is paint my slurry, and then you light it on fire, and you can see a green flame. And it's going to form kind of a crust on the back of it, and that is supposed to hold back the heat scale while doing this. So then what I do is I paint my flux on the top. I also use these tungsten strips that I've bent into different shapes, so I can make them however I want to hold my pieces down, and then they're not sliding all over the place, and then you can keep something right where you want it. So then you have all three pieces that are all ready to go. Then I put flux on the front of them. And then this one, we're going to heat. The solder's on the gold, and I want the solder to go to the silver. So I want to pull my solder down. So what I'm going to do is solder it from underneath. That's why I want it on my expanded metal, because I'm going to pull that solder down towards you. I'm going to get my solder pick. And I want to keep my flame moving while I'm doing this. But you don't want, these pieces don't take as much heat as like if you're doing belt buckles. So you got to turn your torch down when you're doing smaller stuff. Now, if you're super fancy like I am, you have a beautiful $19 crock pot, and it holds your Rio pickle. And then when you're done soldering, I try to do it after every soldering step. Just because then you know it's clean. So see, the boric acid denatured alcohol kept most of that heat scale off the back of it. We'll stick this in the pickle pot and get it out in about 10 minutes and see what she looks like. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to solder probably a 1/2 inch chunks of wire on the backs of these that point straight up in the air. So they'll point straight up in the air like this in 4 different places on the top of this, probably on the top of each flower and then down here in the bottom. What that's going to do is that is going to be able to push through the felt, and then you'll be able to bend them over. This is a very high-end piece that you're going to stick on a pretty hat, and it's just probably going to stay there for the rest of its life. So I want 4 holes is all I'm going to put in this hat, and they're just going to be little round 18 gauge holes, so it's pretty thin, and then that's all that it's going to affect your felt. So I need 4 of them. There we go. Marked 1/2 inch. So then I'll take my side cutters. I always put the flat edge towards the side that I want to be flat. So I have my 4 little pieces, and this is a file, but I'm just gonna drag these across it like this because I really want a very flat surface to solder to, so you don't have a big bubble around it. Okay, so this is how I'm gonna set this up. I have my 4 pins that I'm gonna use, and then we do not want to do anything with the front. What we're going to do is we're gonna take my slurry, get that boric acid, denatured alcohol all mixed up. Then you can just stick your paintbrush in there, paint the top of this, get rid of this. You do not want to light this fire with that tub very close to you. It is very dangerous. So then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my handy flux. You just need kind of a thin layer. So I'm also going to use paste solder. This is what I'm gonna use to solder each one of these pins down. So if I put these in a tweezer, we're gonna put it straight up and down, and then we're going to take my paste solder. We don't need a ton of it, just a little bit on the end. I see how I balance that tweezer. Because I want them straight, these tweezers tend to lean a direction. But if you just have extra little deals in your shop to lean stuff against, it really, really helps. So we're going to solder the stuff on the back. This is just a little bit less heat than what the big torch does, and it's a little bit easier, a little bit softer. And then these tweezers just come right off each one of these. All 4 of my pins are mounted and we're ready to go. So we should be able to stick it in the pickle pot, pickle it for 10 minutes, and then we'll go like crazy. Okay, so I got this out of the pickle pot, rinsed it in water. Doesn't matter if it's cold or hot, just rinse it off. What I usually do on the back of my pieces is do a matte finish. We're gonna run this little wheel. So this, we're just gonna kind of get around these pins, clean them up, make them look presentable. Like I said, I'm not as worried on the back. I just want it to be presentable. Cleaning up is the hardest, most time consuming, I think, part of this. And it's probably one of the most important that gets spent the least amount of time on. Take time. That's the difference between people and pieces, and setting yourself apart of everyone else is how much you care about your piece and how much time you spend cleaning it up and making sure that it's 150%. This is not the cleanest part of today. The idea would be to have a ventilation system set up to pull your air back out of this. Also, a dust collector would be nice too. And that's going to happen in the shop eventually. I'm just going to buff the top of this. You want to kind of take those scratches out, get it nice and pretty, because the next step is going to be engraving, and you want to, the more cleanup you have to do after engraving, the more likely that you're going to take some of your cuts out, the pretty definition and stuff that you have going on. You're going to lose it by buffing it afterwards. So this is my basket. I'm going to set it in my ultrasonic cleaner. Make sure that the liquid is covering your ultrasonic cleaner. I'm going to add a little water to it. There's just ultrasonic cleaner liquid in there with water. Next step is engraving. I have this all cleaned up. It's not spotless. There's some areas that need some work, you know, like where I took the silicone wheel, it's still a little rough and not quite perfect. Now to engrave it, I engrave everything on this metal plate. To put it on there, I use hot glue, but I bent my pins over in the back. I just pulled them over and bent them. So I'm gonna put a bunch down here because I want my piece to be secure. My next big project is the layout. So when I laid this out, I thought that the stems part, the green stemmy part down here, would be really neat with some bright cuts to it. You can see my cuts, and I'm gonna draw this side and this side up, and then we'll start engraving those ones too. When you're at the end, it's really important to make sure that all your cuts are done. So I always, at the end of each piece, I will go through each sequence, whether it's a bright cut sequence or a American scroll sequence, or you're doing flare cut or any of those kind of deals. And you want to make sure that you're done 100%, because that's the time when you have all your tools out and your hands are trained. Okay, now I'm going to fill some of my stems with my 105 again. Then I'll go back and make sure that those go down to the leaves. Okay, so there's my plant. I have all the cuts in it. The leaves are all kind of going funky directions like I want them to. I'm going to set up to do the petals next. So when you shade, a lot of it's starting really light, and then you're gonna angle your graver up as you go, and that makes your cut deeper. So you're gonna start really shallow, pretty much sliding across the top of the metal, and then you go deeper and deeper to kind of give it some, you want to give your it some shape. I'm going to kind of go through and make sure all my cuts are 100% and everything is copacetic. I'm going to pop this off of here and do the final polish on it. So I'll show you guys how to do that. So I fill my syringe with rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol will make everything rust in your shop, so you don't need a ton of this. See how easy that comes off? So then it pops right off. And then because I didn't have the glue down everywhere, there's a couple leaves that are poking up a little bit. But what we're going to do is clean all this up now and finish her up. So I have this microfiber wheel, and I'm just going to clean it up like I did last time, but just a little bit more. I want it clean. I want it to look professional, but I don't necessarily need it to be like I want the front to be. So now we're going to take this on the red rouge and buff it up. You don't want to hold it on there too long. It's going to take your engraving off. You don't want to hold it on. You kind of want your finger to be back there to kind of put a little pressure into it. I might spend a little bit more time on the plant just because I want those bright cuts real bright. Going to kind of make sure we get all the little scratches out of it and it has the shine that you want it to. And then it's going to go back in the ultrasonic. All right, I set my timer for about 20 minutes and turned the heat on, so let's turn the heat off. So we'll pull this out, check it out. We can see how nice and shiny it is. There's bubbles everywhere. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna rinse it off. Just pat it dry, and then we'll go antique it. I washed it off in acetone, and then I washed it in Dawn dish soap. So the most important thing for me in this piece is that it's in the cuts, and I can see that it's in the cuts. It's not taking to the tops of it as much as I'd like it to, but it doesn't need to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pat it dry with my cloth. So the back kind of looks like somebody was murdered with the black marks on the back of my piece. So I'm going to clean up the back before I clean up the front because I think that's important. So we'll just take all this off of it and make it look pretty again. Okay, so there we go. We got her all cleaned up and it's ready to go. Now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take all the black off the top. So there's a couple of things that I use to do that. So a polishing pad from Rio, I use that, and a Mars eraser. The Mars eraser is pretty fancy because like if you really want to, you can trim it down and get it the shape that you want it, but it's gonna take this top layer off that I want to take off. But I think I'm getting pretty close to what I want this to look like on the stem part and the flowers. So we got this one is all cleaned up. Now we'll just clean up these other ones. It's kind of cool. I'm pretty excited about it. I can't wait till some awesome lady wants to put it on a hat. Okay, so now this is, I think this is pretty finished, but it has the look that I wanted. I kind of wanted it darker underneath these leaves, underneath the petal leaves. So this is a finished product for me. It's done, but now one, I have to take a picture of it for my marketing, and two, I have to fit it to the hat. So whenever somebody buys this, I would like to be the one that puts it on the hat myself. I've done one other one that was this interesting, and I fit it to the hat itself. And I'd like to do it just because you're going to be the one that's going to be molding it to the hat. So I'd want it to ride like that on that hat.